So welcome to the SASE transition webinar for the construction sector. The purpose of today really is just to give you sort of 15-20 minutes going through on a technical level the new apprenticeship standards and how they relate back to the current SASE frameworks, which will fully transition and finish at the end of July. My name is Gabriel Staples. I'm the sector manager for the portfolio manager, sorry, for construction, building services and utilities. So as I say, the purpose is to really give you some sort of technical detail as to help you plan and prepare for the transition. Many of these standards are already live, but the absolute sort of cut-off point for the frameworks will be nationally will be the end of July. So in terms of the current landscape, as you know, for construction, there's quite a large number of apprenticeship occupations under SASE that are currently catered for with just a few standards. So construction, building, specialist, technical, civil engineering. That covers the vast majority of construction. Now that's really has changed quite significantly, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about for the next sort of 15 minutes. Obviously, the current SASE frameworks have an MBQ pretty much per occupation, and Pearson's approach has been to have our BTEC Level 2 Construction Occupations Diploma, which has pathways that can underpin. Now, the good news is that can still be used for a large number, and some of the MBQs as well, but the use of it is not quite as clear-cut as it was before, where you have to do a qualification, and that's fine. You have to actually, under the new regime, you have to actually demonstrate that your qualifications will meet the new standards unless they are mandated, but in the main they are not. So what will follow now is a number of slides with tables on them, and what I'll do is I'll go through, I'll bring these slides up and highlight some points of interest or anything where I think it's worth noting. So on this first slide, we can see that there's a mixture of some of the standards have been replaced. Now this is taking the framework on the left here, the existing framework, and the current qualification product you may already be approved to use. And that qualification we've just identified. As we move to the right, you'll identify whether there's a standard replacement for it, an equivalent standard, what that title is, and any particular notes. So for example here, Wood Occupations Level 2 certificate doesn't really have a direct replacement, although as you'll see later on the diploma does. Whereas bricklayer, the trowel occupations can be used in the new standards. Now, for that one particular, for bricklayer, it's not mandated, and I will highlight wherever I can if they are mandated. That particular standard, the MBQ, we believe can be used as a qualification on program and can be mapped to the competence requirements of the skills in particular of the new standards. But because it's not mandated, you would need to demonstrate that as a training provider, you need to demonstrate to the employer and to ESFA that the qualification is fit for purpose for that reason. With regards to the so level 3 MBQ diploma in painting and decorating, that's a no, although there is a standard, but it's at level 2, so you can't use that. And you'll find in the new world of standards, you'll see that really an occupation cannot exist at level 2 and 3. It can only exist under these new rules at one level or the other. So employer groups have had to sort of plump for a particular level for their standard, and that means that sometimes the progression is now limited. So moving on, and it's probably worth saying actually the vast majority of construction qualifications we offer, of course, are MBQs very specific to the trade. in the rare occasion that they are mandated, then that's fine, you don't have a problem. But if you were to do the apprenticeship standard and not do an MBQ, then CSCS, the card scheme organisers, would need to have given a special sort of approval to that apprenticeship framework, and they haven't actually done that in particular in many cases, not in all cases. So an MBQ, we still feel, if it can be mapped, an MBQ we still feel is a useful vehicle to capture the evidence on program in an externally quality assured way, and also to satisfy the demands of the requirements of CSCS card, which the new apprenticeships don't always do, at least not yet. So with regards to the top item here, property maintenance operative, this has been put in that it's been replaced. That MVQ is sort of in a standard, but really it's not a direct replacement. The job role isn't quite the same as a sort of maintenance carpenter and joiner, but you could probably use, together with some additional evidence around the plumbing and the electrical, you could probably use that MVQ to meet the new standards. And the benefit of that is that you would also satisfy the CSCS requirement for that occupation. The apprenticeship itself, without that MVQ, probably wouldn't meet CSCS requirements. So although you could do that MVQ, you'd have to supplement it probably with some extra evidence around the electrical and the plumbing stuff that's in there. The job roles aren't quite aligned. As I say, a maintenance carpenter, joiner or bricklayer would be perhaps a little more specialist than the job role for this, which is a bit more of a general sort of caretaker slash maintenance person who is multi-skilled. There's a mandated qualifications here. The wood occupations MBQ diploma is mandated in standard, so you can use that no problem. Ditto the formwork as well. That's mandated as well, which means that you don't have those CSCS issues and complications. So moving on, there's a couple of omissions here. So the civil engineering operations, which is the current version of the construction operations apprenticeship and MBQ, which has been very popular. That's obviously quite a gap in the new standards that they don't have a CONOPS, the construction operations standard. So it's worth noting. There are some specific ones for highways, and there's a plant one coming up, but in terms of civil engineering, that is quite a gap. But fingers crossed they will look to create one. So moving on, road building, as I say, highways maintenance, and road building probably can cover that. Some of these 601 numbers here have actually since been replaced last year with new versions, but effectively the map is still correct, so whether they've been replaced or not. So plant operations is one where it's in development, and hopefully that will be replaced sooner rather than later, or live sooner rather than later, hopefully before the cut-off date. On here's a couple of points of note on this slide. So level 5 MBQ diploma in construction management, that is for construction management as opposed to site management. There is currently no replacement for a level 5. There is a level 6 site management, but for level 5 and construction management as a concept, there isn't quite a replacement. But I'll go on to talk about that, and it looks like there may be something in development for that. Building services engineering technician, for that level 4 building services and construction management, we do have produced a mapping document online for that, in fact, because that's a qualification that sort of relates to the new version. Plastering is, that was a no, actually since they changed plastering to a level 2, that MBQ diploma could then be used on program with the mapping. And in all these qualifications, if it's not mandated, there is a requirement for providers to map to show that there is a direct link and that it can meet the skills of the standard. And you can use the funding if you show that link for the training for the on-program. However, that funding can't officially cover the awarding body fees. But generally, with the conversation we've had with providers so far, is that the contracts they have with employers and selling the benefits of an on-program qualification that gives them a drop-off point or gives them some standardized quality assured achievement, and also the CSCS card link. The benefits of that usually are accepted by the employers, and therefore it is possible in that contract to sort of cover and absorb that registration and certification fee, which is obviously just a small fraction of the overall cost of delivering training for a couple of years. So next slide, obviously a mixture of sort of yeses and nos. Well, there's several that have a replacement and several that don't. And again on this slide too, with regards to wall and floor tiling, interior systems, thermal insulation, and stonemasonry is a specialist sector subject, and that is in development. Again, so ditto, we have replacements for floor covering, which is the floor layer. Replacement title is floor layer. There's the civil engineering for technicians is the qualification we developed for the apprenticeship framework some years back with ICE. That is actually still being used, not mandated, but it's still being used, that qualification, by the employer groups and the colleges serving those employers successfully in the new standards. And we also provide a skills portfolio, which isn't a qualification, but it's a product you can register on, and it sends an SV out to Quality Assure, and we've provided the specification in the same way as much as you would do for an actual qualification. So that SV service, together with the civil engineering qualification there, is still being used successfully to deliver. A couple of omissions though. Occupational work supervision is there's no standard for that yet, and construction contracting operations, again, that's not been replaced yet, although I will talk about that in a second. There is actually plans afoot to get a new standard developed quickly. Digital engineering technician, this is around built environment design. It's not quite as generalist as that NBQ is, however, it does specify both the NBQ mandated and the BTEC national, so that's good news for those of you doing that current framework. So here we have, again, there's a couple of qualifications that do meet. So the surveying, property and maintenance framework, the similar version for that now is called surveying technician, and that can also use a BTEC national. Again, although it's not mandated, RICS have confirmed that a BTEC national with the right surveying units would be appropriate for that. And of course the MBQ, as long as it's mapped to the on-program skills requirements, could be used as well. The last entry here on the list is worth highlighting. So that's the BTEC Level 2 Diploma in Construction Occupations, and I put sort of various standards. Obviously that has 14, 15 or so pathways for crafts, for the knowledge. That qualification, we're not going to get rid of it, and we fully plan that could be used by providers moving forward to meet the underpinning knowledge requirements of those new standards. In general, the standards have, they may have changed slightly, but the standards for being competent at level 2 in those craft trades have not significantly changed with the introduction of this new government-led transition and the policy change. So we feel that the mapping should be fairly successful, and that qualification could be fairly successfully used to meet the knowledge requirements in college or by a provider as part of the package you sell to employers to get learners to the gateway point before they do their EPA. So on this final, I've got one more table coming up, which is just about to summarise new frameworks where there's no previous relation to SASE. So as part of this process, the employer groups have set up, and instead of, in some cases, instead of replacing like for like, they've decided that new occupations needed to be created. They've used the opportunity of the reform to actually create new frameworks. So here we have a large list, and it's worth looking at those for a couple of minutes. Here you'll see a variety of sort of level 3 and 4 where you can use high national certificate, for example, with the right combination of units to meet some of these. Rail engineering design technician, again, that came out of a sort of branch of civil engineering, so you could use, we know the employers are in fact using the BTEC level 3 diploma in engineering, as well as a specialist SV service which we provide as well, which centres can get approval for. Again, these aren't currently mandated, although as they're being revised, it may well be that they become mandated, because the employer group are keen to ensure consistency in the offer for those level 3. That's the Technician Apprenticeship Consortium that we've worked with for some years. Transport planning is in the same group as that, and that's again another specialist branch of civil engineering that's come out of this reform process. And we provide a BTEC for that, as well as an SV service. Digital engineering has actually already been mentioned, but that is technically a new sort of occupation. And there's a couple where we suggest BTECs in engineering and HNCs in engineering, and BTEC nationals in construction for meeting the knowledge requirement. Obviously, when using BTEC nationals or high nationals for meeting the knowledge requirements of these new standards, and there's quite a range at level 4 now and level 6 in fact, but level 4 is where the technician level starts for a lot of the on-site, the contractor side. No, it's important to look at that and make sure you choose the right units. We've not gone so far as to say which units should be used for which standard, but it's clear that with the right combination of units, you should be able to meet the underpinning knowledge. And employers generally have been very supportive of BTEC nationals for both engineering and construction sector, in that they accept and appreciate the fundamentals of the qualifications, which obviously are designed to cover the principal, the technologies, the engineering and construction, maths and science, all that knowledge that is best off delivered in college and private provider, and that means the employers have got a good level of confidence that the learner has at least reached that level 3 academic standard in understanding those concepts before they get fully into their job role, or at least they're learning it as they're starting their apprenticeship. So this slide here is a reminder about what they are, which you'll be aware of. In terms of endpoint assessment for construction, Pearson has not yet developed any specific assessments, with the exception of the dual fuel smart meter installer. Now that decision is based on experiences and sort of a business level decision so far. That's not to say that we won't develop them in future, but at the moment we've not gone ahead with several developments that we were looking at doing as an EPA in terms of the development sort of timescales and the complexity and the changing requirements, because a large number of the construction standards are actually being reviewed and changing this year, which means anything we did develop now would become obsolete anyway. So we have taken a step at the moment, temporarily taken the decision to step back a little from the EPA side. But where there is a particular demand for Pearson to be involved in EPA, obviously we would investigate that and take it forward in the business. In terms of our offer, this is a screenshot of the new website. Well, it's not that new now. It's a dedicated website for apprenticeships. It does still cover the legacy stuff for frameworks, but it contains the support materials, a description of the standard, where we've got something to offer. So that's where we've got an on-program offer, and particularly where we've got an EPA, of course, as well. And where we do, we tell you, if there's mapping, we provide that, and we fully intend to provide more mapping documents as we get closer to the end of July. But here you will see a list of all the standards that we have something to support on, and that will be growing sort of on a weekly basis, really. Every single sector is contained here, not just construction. A note on the mapping, which I think I've sort of alluded to, but in terms of technically the mapping, which I've talked about on program, when I've said a yes, unless it's specifically mandated, and generally they aren't, but unless it's mandated, you do have to be careful to make sure that what you're delivering does meet the on-program knowledge or skills or behaviours. If it does and where it does, then you can use the funding to deliver the training, though, as I say, you cannot use that funding to claim for the awarding body certification fees and awarding fees and registration fees, unless it's actually mandated in the standard, and there are a few examples of that. Below is a screenshot of one of the bits of mapping we've done for our higher national certificates. With the multiple tabs there, it can cover sort of 5 or 6 standards, and we suggest which units can be used to cover the standards. I think it's important to reiterate the advantages to employers of setting a qualification on programme where nothing is mandated. Of course, you've got an externally quality assured recognition of achievement. You've got better chance of preparing them to the gateway point, which is very important for ESFA and IFATE. Less chance of failure of the EPA if they've had a rigorous experience and rigorous training on programme. And as I say, regardless of the funding, most providers will be able to sort of sell the qualification benefits to employers. In particular, if there's a risk of them not actually completing the apprenticeship, but they do end up with an MBQ or a similar qualification, then at least they drop off with something that they can then use to help get employment. This is one of the final slides now, just to note a couple of developments. I did mention this earlier, but the construction contracting operations, there is a level 3, a very, very popular framework. No current replacement at the moment, but an employer group has just been formed to cover these. So the technicians are doing the buying, planning, design, coordination, site support, technical support, things like that. So I'm hopeful that with CITB facilitating that, I'm hopeful that that group will get something together and approve in the next couple of months. And ditto construction management, I know that we've got this level 5 that we've talked about. It's hopeful that that same group will then go on to a construction management as opposed to site management as a progression at level 5 to also go forward in the new standards. And finally, just a note on our support. Obviously, you can see on the screen the options you have. You may have a business development manager, but you can contact customer services if not. And depending on whether you're a private provider or an FE centre, you can email directly as well. And from April, we will have the FAQs available online. Thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions, then please get in touch.